Mr. Speaker, if the big, beautiful bill does add to the debt, will President Trump own that?
It's not going to add to the debt.
Mr. Speaker, the Joint Committee on Taxation, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the Tax Foundation, the Penn-Wharton budget model all say this will add trillions of dollars to the deficit. Are you really telling the American people this will not add one penny to the debt and deficit? You can guarantee that?
I am telling you this is going to reduce the deficit.
Well, Speaker Mike Johnson knows that his party only pretends to care about the debt when Democrats are in charge. So he's now on a press tour trying to convince people that his big, beautiful bill will not add to the debt. Of course, he's lying, though. Check out this headline. It says Trump tax cuts would add $3.8 trillion to the debt, according to the Congressional Budget Office. He's also he's continuing to lie about who's going to get screwed when they cut Medicaid. According to the CBO, 7.7 million people would go uninsured if this bill passes. So Republicans attempt to explain this away by saying that there is massive fraud from able-bodied men taking advantage of the system, who I don't know, I don't think that they know. But Mike Johnson was pressed on this during his recent interview with Meet the Press. Take a look.
They say many will lose coverage because of paperwork, red tape, or failing and falling short of the new rules. So just let me ask you directly, do you have any actual proof that these people are engaging in fraud? Millions of Americans, as you say.
This is a very important distinction. Those 4.8 million people will not lose their Medicaid unless they choose to do so. I will go into any town hall in any district in America and explain what this is, and every single person will nod their heads and go, oh, that makes sense. You're telling me that you're going to require the able-bodied, these young men, for example, okay, to only work or volunteer in their community for 20 hours a week, and that's too cumbersome for them? I'm not buying it. The American people are not buying it.
Well, John covered this last week, but just as a reminder, the idea that it's just able-bodied men who are going to lose Medicaid is a lie. 92% of people on Medicaid are working, have a disability, or are performing duties such as going to school or caregiving that could qualify for an exemption from meeting work requirements. But contrary to conservative punditry, that population is overwhelmingly made up of women, 79%, mostly living in rural areas, who are caring for elderly parents or adult children and have low levels of formal education and have recently left the workforce. And there's a reason that Johnson has to lie about all of this. That reason is because he knows that while voters support work requirements, they're clearly against any cuts. A recent national survey by KFF, a nonpartisan health research group, highlights the nuances of the issue. It says overall, the poll found that 62% of US adults support new legislation requiring nearly all adults to work or be looking for work in order to get health insurance through Medicaid, including 6 in 10 independents. It plummets to 32% when respondents hear the argument that most Medicaid recipients are already working or are unable to work. When respondents hear the argument that such new rules would raise administrative costs without significantly affecting the share of Medicaid recipients who are working, support drops to 40%. So I always want to point out whenever we cover this topic that work requirements are kind of bogus when the government is also actively firing people from their jobs and when AI is rolling out and there are no contingency plans, at least not from the government, in place regarding what we plan to do with all of these newly unemployed people who definitely want to work and people who were working. But now, even if they want to, they're not even sure if their industry is hiring. They're not even sure if they are hireable anymore or employable, or if they're just going to be replaced by AI. So there's a lot of shifts happening right now. Typically, you would rely on your government to help you navigate these shifts, but this government is doing nothing. It's not doing nothing. It's making things actively worse. So it does help a little bit that there's a provision that accounts for people who are looking for work, but overall, this is still a very ineffective policy that would cause way more damage and trouble, both to people's literal lives, because people's literal lives might be in jeopardy with this, and also it's going to create a lot of chaos with the government's effectiveness and its efficiency, which we know that they care very much about. So there is more to this story, Jayar, but what do you make of Johnson's attempts to pacify Republican supporters? Because that's kind of what it seems like he's doing. Also, does it even matter to the Republicans at this point if the average American actually supports anything that this government is doing?
Yeah, it seems like it has that kind of energy. Look, this is the same lies that Mike Johnson was telling last week. He went on the Sunday shows just like he did a day ago to say the same thing. Well, no, it actually only gets rid of people who are waste, fraud, and abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse. They're still using that line, even though Elon Musk has a black eye from fighting with Scott Bessent over not bringing up any of this waste, fraud, and abuse that he promised them that he'd give. This trillions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse. So obviously this is just a direct projection of what happened with Doge, which was a lot of nothing, which was spending more than they said that they would save, by the way, which is the same thing that's happening within things like this bill. If you're kicking 7.7 million people off of Medicaid and you're saying you're saving it because you've got 1.4 million people who are part of waste, fraud, and abuse, 1.4 million, 7.7 million. I think that's a lot more people that aren't supposed to be kicked off of it when you're claiming only 1.4 million illegal immigrants are utilizing and frauding the system. By the way, illegal immigrants that also pay taxes into our system that don't get anything back for it. That's a whole separate issue. But in order for them to trigger enough people's emotions, or feelings of superiority, they like to say things like, well, I mean, only these able-bodied men, these 20-year-olds that are sitting in their mother's basement playing video games all day. They come up with these characterizations of people for you to hate. So then you can support their nonsense talking points about how much better you are than them. Which is why those percentages of people who support this change, when they hear certain factors and parameters that people like Mike Johnson and the rest of this administration don't want to talk about. It changes people's idea of how this whole thing works. They know that so many people who support them don't know how it all works. Even that 1.4 million number that they're throwing around, that isn't even valid. That's based off of something with the states and how they had this factored in of some folks who may have used the system, but it's definitely not 1.4 million people that they're kicking off the systems clean, cut, and dry. It's just not the way it works. So once people have the actual information, again, education for how this stuff works, they have a clearer thought about how it is and how they're actually in support of us getting the benefits that we deserve. When it all comes back to still these trillions of dollars that they're adding to the debt deficit, right? They're still adding all this money. They don't want to talk about that part. So as you're kicking people off of Medicaid, how much is that actually saving when you're still adding this much more on the backs of, as you say, our kids and our grandkids? It's all BS. It's a constant battle of the same talking points. It's honestly, it's a sign that they don't care whether or not you know they're lying or not, because they figure we're gonna do whatever the hell we want. We've got a guy who wants to be a dictator in office. So as people find out how much of a dictator he really is, who cares? He's a dictator. That's the mindset they're giving. I know you're gonna go to someone else who thinks the same way in a second.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made though about how they basically create these archetypes that their base can demonize, and it's so effective. And they do this all the time because people who support the party can just be mad at some imaginary person, which is usually enough to get them very upset and get them to support the initiatives of the government. And those people at the same time can also take comfort in the fact that they are not that archetype, so they themselves are not the problem, even though they're supporting everything from that party.